Okay, so this evening, what we wanted to share with you is the animation curriculum, acceptability, feasibility, and engagement of a specifically designed FASD educational intervention in 2 mainstream classroom settings. So this is a phase 1, a pilot study that's been carried out by myself, Jessica Rutherford. I'm currently working with the University of Salford that's in the UK, but as I mentioned, I'm based in Dubai. And my colleague Alan here, Dr. Alan Price, who is leading this project from Salford. So we want to start by acknowledging and giving very, very big thanks to the Mohapatra Family Foundation, who made this research possible with a very generous donation. This research has evolved from my PhD study that started in 2015 and was a very long road of self-funding struggles, and it means an awful lot that we were supported with funding to take this into actual testing, live testing within classrooms. So very, very big thank you there. We also want to thank and acknowledge the support of PopFast, who were on the ground in British Columbia, supporting us, helping us to get into schools, and were just connecting us with the teachers, and yeah, just being eyes and ears on the ground was really, really helpful having them. Thanks to the University of Salford, I approached them after completing my PhD and said, I've got an idea. I've done all this work. I've done 10 years almost on this, and I want to take it into testing. And the FASD team at Salford said, yeah, come on board. Let's see what we can do. We'll figure something out. And of course, we really, really want to shine a light on the support and the involvement and the efforts and the commitment from the staff, the students, and the families of the students involved in the schools in British Columbia, Canada, and Northeast England, who we were working with. Because without their involvement and without their support, this would have been a very different study. And we really needed them to be all in and want to be part of this. So, oh, this has got really small. Sorry, I'm gonna look like I'm getting really close to my screen here. So the animation curriculum is a digital storytelling. It's a really creative educational intervention to support students in classroom settings. It's an inclusive approach with the intention of keeping individuals with FASD, diagnosed or suspected, in the classrooms learning amongst their peers instead of being isolated. Being isolated or facing difficulties in educational settings is something that we're seeing quite a lot when we engage with families and carers living with FASD. Education is a challenge that comes up again and again and again. So what I really wanted to do was to try and find a way to alter what was going on in the classroom without changing their delivery and their content, that included and was a strengths-based approach for those with FASD. My background is in animation, filmmaking, digital storytelling, all of that kind of thing. That's my academic background and where I came at this from. And the two started to align very quickly for me. I saw opportunities here for this process. And so animation filmmaking, it's very, very creative. It's tactile. It's slow. It is a slow process. It's a very repetitive process. And it centers around storytelling, around narrative building, and about making anything that you can imagine come to life on screen, bringing characters to life, bringing stories to life. And I think it's a really valuable tool in that way. And there's a lot of connections that you will see throughout this presentation, I hope. I then started exploring the work of Dr. Carolyn Blackburn and many others who have looked at educational experiences of those with FASD. And it highlighted the best practice approaches for students with FASD in classroom settings. And I saw so much alignment between my background in animation and what these experts and researchers were saying about how best to support this population within a classroom. So throughout my PhD, I was drawing on lived experience. I went and worked at an FASD summer camp, a residential camp, where I was working directly with individuals who had FASD. They were aged between 9 and 18 years. And so I was really getting the best understanding I possibly could of what it means to live with FASD and what that looks like. And this was, as I said, it was a residential camp. So just getting as much experience as an understanding there. I was obviously doing a lot of research as well. And then the later part of my PhD was a co-design element of this framework with experts in related fields. What came out of that, my PhD, was a 7-step curriculum that had been specifically designed to support learners with FASD, where each lesson had a specific structure of delivery. Each one of these 7 modules is inquiry based, and it centers around the anticipation, action, and that is within each lesson where the animation curriculum is delivered, within each module, each of those 7 modules of the curriculum, and then as through the program as a whole, all 7 modules combined. You also have that reflection element through the viewing of this final production, this final film that comes out of being involved in this process. So that was sort of the framework that had evolved. And then what I wanted to do was go and test it in classrooms and to take it to that next level. So that's where I connected with Salford and Alan came in, and this project came to life. So the animation curriculum is inclusive, it's strengths-based, and as I said, the plan is to enable those with FASD to be learning within that classroom setting. They are not learning how to create an animated film. They are, but that's not the focus here. I could take animation out of the title and it wouldn't really change anything. The purpose of this is not to learn how to make an animation. These 7 modules that make up this program are standalone interventions, and each one has an academic output and a creative output. And at the end, after completing all of the 7 modules, those creative outputs can be combined, pieced together like a jigsaw. The students do all this themselves. They piece it together like a jigsaw, and it creates this animated film. But as we're working through the process, that is not the focus. That is not what the intention, the aim is here. So, right, I've just said that, sorry. Oh, did it move? There we go. So the aims of this phase 1, this pilot study, was to understand the acceptability of the program amongst the teachers and the students, to assess the feasibility of the program in terms of delivery, and that was delivery for the teacher, but also delivery for myself and Alan managing this project, especially from a distance. We weren't on the ground. We were training the teachers in delivery and supporting them remotely, but they were doing everything. So we want to make sure that everything that we're doing here is transferable and that we aren't involved. We didn't want to be on the ground with the teachers interfering and getting involved and doing all of that. So the teacher workload as well, that was a focus. We wanted to make sure that the teachers weren't overwhelmed with having to learn this process. And just looking at the integration of what this would be with their current content and the topics that they were delivering. So we also wanted to determine the level of student engagement with each of the 7 modules. So we looked at the engagement of the class as a whole and the student or students with suspected or diagnosed FASD. So we recorded those two things separately. Alan will come on to speak about those shortly. But we did that by module as well. So we have different engagement scores for these different approaches. So I've been talking about these 7 modules. So what are they? So down one side of your screen there, you will see the 7 modules that make up the animation curriculum. We have story and script writing. There's a lot of role play that comes into that. We talk a lot about relationships and emotions. We can talk as much as we want. This is all up to the teacher. And with them, they know their students better than anybody. So it depends how much they want to bring into that, how much emphasis they want to put on all of those things. But we really look at storytelling, and it's all centered around the specific topic that the school have chosen to deliver. Look at creative production, which is very arts and crafts, very tactile, multi-sensory. We're exploring different textures, different materials. We can go and forage for these materials. We can use recycled materials. We really get creative, very hands-on, very messy in that. Storyboarding, animatic, sound, then animate, and then the final edit, review, and export. So you can see there there's small descriptions with each of the modules, just to give you a bit more of an insight of what that involves. But we move from something that's very written, writing, role play, to something that's very tactile, kinesthetic, to then something that's drawn, very visual. We start to see things come to life through the animatic. Then we go very auditory. So we're coming at this. This is an immersive experience, looking at all of the different learning styles, the different learning pathways. And within each lesson, so story and script writing, for example, can be delivered in 1 lesson. It might need to be delivered in 7 lessons. It just depends how big or small the teacher decides to go with the project. But every single lesson where we're working on the animation curriculum, there's a set structure. That structure follows that anticipation, action, reflection cycle. But in itself, it's immersive, it's inquiry based. There are actions and experiences that are to spark learning. It's all driven by exploration, curiosity, experimentation, group work, working together to explore all these different things. And each one, as we move through from story and script writing all the way down to the editing process, is building on the skills that they learn earlier on in the process. And it's also building on the academic knowledge as well. So the method, excuse me. Schools were recruited through personal networks. Alan and I reached out to a lot of people that we knew, and just asked the question, does anybody want to work with us? Does anybody have a school who might be interested in getting involved? And we were really fortunate that we did find 2 schools who were keen. Part of the criteria with these schools, they needed to have a student aged between 7 and 11 years with either diagnosed or suspected FASD, and that is suspected by a medical professional. So suspected, and like in the diagnostic process, we all know how that goes, very, very lengthy, no matter where you are in the world, unfortunately. And of course, a class teacher who is willing to learn and apply this new approach and is really keen to give their time and energy to this. We consulted a PPIE group, which we were really fortunate. So we consulted a group of people who had lived experience of FASD, and we were really fortunate within that group to have somebody who was actually living with FASD who gave us their feedback on our ideas and our plans for this project. So that was really positive. We had a co-design element with the participating schools where we had some meetings and we went back and forth. to identify the topics that they were delivering in that final term of their school year, and just have a discussion around what would work and how we could approach the animation curriculum being used as their delivery method for those topics. A detailed facilitator handbook and pre-recording training videos were provided. They were sent to both of the class teachers, and the training videos were pre-recorded so that teachers could access them and rewatch them in their own time. There was absolutely no need to be on Teams at a certain time to go through training. I just sent everything to them and they were able to access that as and when they were in the headspace, they had the time, they had the capacity, and the feedback from that was really positive. So I think that that's definitely an approach that we will use going forward. Teachers completed an engagement form after every lesson. And that's something that Alan will talk about shortly. And at the very end, upon completion and at the end of the school year, I interviewed the class teachers to really get an understanding of their experience. I would like you all to take a note of the breakdown of the two schools that's under the picture there on the slide. What we were looking for was we were looking at the class as a whole and their engagement with this process, and then the student with diagnosed or suspected FASD. What we found was that the two classes that we were working with were quite complex. This wasn't a case of looking at a very mainstream population and one individual with diagnosed or suspected FASD. So as you can see, we had 3 students diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, 1 with ADHD, an additional 3 with suspected, and then 1 with suspected FASD in Canada in the school we worked in. And then in the UK, 1 with autism. Quite a lot of social, emotional, mental health needs, 1 diagnosed with FASD, and 2 English as a second language. So a real mix of neurodiversities in those classrooms. Okay, the button, it doesn't work. Okay, Alan, I will hand over to you and I will mute can I mute myself? I will mute myself and let you go from here.
Thank you. Yeah, you can mute or you could just stop talking. But either way, hi everyone. Thanks, Jessica, and thank you for promoting me to the leader of this project as well, Jessica. Just to clarify, everyone, I am not the leader of this project. This is Jessica's baby. She spent the many years of doing a PhD developing the animation curriculum. It was just useful to have a university attached to the project, and so I'm here representing the university. We went through a whole rigmarole trying to see whether we could actually employ Jessica as a research assistant, as a research fellow or a researcher. The fact that she lives in Dubai made that more complicated, so we had to sort of employ her as a what was it in the end, a provider or some word like that isn't employee. All of which means I get to call myself the principal investigator on this project and put that on my CV and wave it in someone's face when I'm going for a promotion in a few years. But it's not me. It's not me at all. It's Jessica. My role on here was to collaborate, and I was involved in those discussions and talking to the families affected by FASD and gathering people's opinions. I also, I suppose my main role was in sort of helping to think about the design of this study and how we actually ask the questions. Is the animation curriculum a feasible thing to deliver in schools? Can it be done? Will people like it? And what are the best ways of asking whether people will like it? This is phase 1 of probably 3. We'll get to our sort of ideas for the future. Nothing is set in stone yet. We'll get to that later on, and we're this is as much a listening event as it is a speaking event, although we've only been speaking so far. We're here to hear your views as well, and we're really keen to hear your thoughts on where this might go in the future. Having said that, this is phase 1, and this is really preliminary. All we're trying to do here in this very small preliminary study with only 2 schools is but really just get some descriptive, some qualitative feedback from the schools involved. I primarily tend to work with numbers rather than descriptions. So I'm at heart, I'm more of a quantitative researcher than a qualitative, although I very much value this kind of mixed methods approach. So alongside doing interviewing some of the teaching staff, which Jessica did, and she's going to talk about what they said shortly, I was keen that we include something that can be measured in terms of numbers. Now, bear in mind there are only 2 schools, so our sample size here really is 2. We're very much limited in anything we can confirm or have any confidence in so far. But what we can hope to do at this stage in terms of our sort of engagement data is start to think about some of the broad patterns. So we found this engagement scale, which is actually produced by Barry Carpenter and others, who's based in the UK and specialises in FASD as well as other developmental conditions. And it's a sort of classroom data collection method for measuring children's engagement in class, and it does that throughout these 7 different aspects of engagement: awareness, curiosity, investigation, discovery, anticipation, initiation, and persistence. Now, this is completed by the teacher in the class, so the teacher is observing as well as facilitating this class, and we ask the teacher to mark the students according to their sort of perceived levels of engagement across those 7 different subscales of engagement, excuse me. And that's done on a 4-point scale. Were they not focused at all? Were they had minimal levels of engagement? Was their engagement partly sustained, mostly sustained, or fully sustained? And what we asked them to do, and Jessica already mentioned this, was please fill this in once for the student with FASD and once again for the class as a whole. Because what we hope, as Jessica said, what we hope the animation curriculum can be is an inclusive classroom intervention for mixed groups, something that isn't just for students with FASD or isn't just for students with additional needs, but can be applied, can be used by this mixed group, so that no one has to be isolated or segregated or anything like that. We want to keep these children together in class. I can't skip. Jessica, can you skip to the next slide, please? One thing we did find in terms of a sort of broad pattern in the data here is that the British school teacher tended to provide slightly higher engagement scores than the Canadian school teacher. Now, that could be for all kinds of different reasons. It could be that the engagement levels really were higher in the British school. That's a possibility. It could be because something to do with just those individual teachers. Maybe one is slightly more optimistic than the other, or something like that. Could it even be just a cultural difference between Brits and Canadians? It could be any number of explanations for that, and you can't really get an answer on that. So what we've done with this data is we've worked out the average for across both of those schools. Slide, please. So what we have here is we have the graph. This is for the first module, and we have a graph showing the engagement levels for each module. Again, remember that we're not with this level of data with only 2 participants, really 2 schools. I don't worry too much about the individual scores, the actual numbers here, because it needs to be taken with a pinch of salt because it's such a small sample size. However, what I'm interested in is the overall pattern. And the overall pattern here, apart from the one I already mentioned with the slight difference in between the 2 schools, is number 1, the engagement levels tended to be quite high as you can see here for the story and script writing module, engagement levels were high. Four is the maximum they could possibly be. So these are pretty high. And the other general pattern that I'm seeing here is that the engagement levels were very similar for the student with FASD and for the group as a whole. Skip slide, please. Again, with creative production, there are some slight differences here and there, but we really can't read too much into these slight differences at this level. Again, the pattern I'm seeing here is that the engagement levels were similar across the two, student with FASD and the whole class, and that the engagement levels were high. Slide, please. This is the one where this is the kind of thing we maybe keep an eye on at this stage. Again, it might just be a sort of artifact of the data. It might just be sort of random differences. It looks like on Storyboard, what we're getting here is slightly higher engagement scores for the class as a whole compared to the students with FASD. We had a quick think about this, and there is this storyboarding session. This is the one, Jessica, I think, where there is requires a certain amount of fine motor skills. So, you know, could that have something to do with it? Again, at this stage, we can't be too sure, but it's the kind of thing we're going to keep an eye on, and it's one of the reasons why we need to, in phase 2, we need to recruit a lot more than 2 schools, because the more data you have, the more you can do with it, the more you can read into individual sort of areas of the data. Slide, please, and we'll skip through the others relatively quickly. So the animatic, again, high levels of engagement and very similar across both groups. After that, we have sound, again, fairly high, not quite as high as some of the others, but very similar. Maybe some slightly higher scores for the students with FASD, but we really can't read too much into that. And then I think the last one is the one where they're actually doing the animation, and well, it seems that students were certainly engaged at this stage. So again, just to repeat my sort of main conclusion from those, albeit we're limited in the conclusion we can make, we're certainly, I think, encouraged to see that the students with FASD had similar engagement levels to the rest of the class, and that the engagement levels tended to be pretty high. That is encouraging, and there's a few things that we'll keep an eye on as we go into stage 2 with bigger data. And I think that is where I hand back to Jessica for now.
Okay, thank you, Alan. That is also where we switch from the quantitative data analysis to start looking at the qualitative data. And as I said, as we both mentioned before, I interviewed both class teachers at the end of delivery, and we were also collecting a little bit of qualitative data in those feedback forms, those engagement forms that each teacher completed after every lesson. Just a little comment here or there. And well, I'll talk you through the results. So breaking it down, we found themes, did a big thematic analysis using NVivo and transcribed it was all very, we used all the research best practice approaches. But the themes that came out were the responses around the students, the teachers, and the resources. So there were the 3 themes that we began to analyze. The students, we found that the students with FASD, very generally speaking, were fully participating at certain times, and were really engaged. They showed creativity, and some showed, there was only 2, but one showed very strong leadership skills. The class as a whole displayed turn-taking skills that all happened very naturally, and all of the students showed excitement and pride in their creations. So every stage, they were excited about what they had produced, which is really great to see. For the teachers, they reported feeling confident in making small changes to the program that suited their particular student group. That is something that we wanted, something that we encouraged. And I provided this handbook for the teachers, and it wasn't set in stone, and that was made known to them that if it wasn't suitable, please do make these adjustments and let us know what those adjustments are, because we can take that forward as well. And teachers reported that they were amazed by how many small and very unexpected moments of learning that they witnessed in the students with FASD and the class as a whole. So this is things like social skills and interaction, communication amongst their peers, and just all this team working skills, such as the turn taking, as I mentioned. And then the resources, one school reported that the resources were exactly as needed. The other highlighted some difficulties and areas for improvement. So that was really helpful. And it highlighted that the differences in how people interact with the resources that we provided. And we will absolutely be making some of those improvements that were recommended, and having a good look through and considering all of the others. And both teachers felt that they were well supported. So in terms of delivery from Alan and I, our perspective, and doing all of this remotely, the teachers feeling supported means that this is possible, and that we can move on and start to explore higher numbers of schools and gathering bigger data. Just a few quotes here that were pulled from the interview transcripts. This study was looking at the acceptability, the feasibility, and the engagement of this program in these two schools. So I wanted to highlight these quotes that from both teachers. There's a mix here, but one of the teachers said, "I thought it was animation, but what they've actually got from this is far more than what I first imagined. And I wasn't dealing with behaviors constantly." So that's teachers spoke about how they were able to just step back and observe, and it became very student-led. In terms of feasibility, it was super easy, minimal planning. That's exactly what we want. We don't want this to be a burden to any of the teachers. We want to help them. We want to make things easier and bring in this approach that is inclusive. And then in terms of engagement, it was just lovely to see the impact that it had on the children communicating with each other and sharing ideas. And that is something that didn't typically happen in that classroom. That teacher spoke a lot about the social interactions, and this was surprising. This was up there with the most engaging content that kids can have. They worked the entire time period, continued working at their desks as we were cleaning up. So they were really engaged, and they were very chatty and excited. When I carried out these two interviews, we've mentioned this during this presentation. I started this in 2015 as my PhD project. And it was a really, really big day for me personally when we received funding to carry out this study. The second really big day in my journey with the animation curriculum, was when I interviewed these teachers. And when I interviewed both, and I heard the way that they were speaking about their students and about their classes with such pride and enthusiasm and excitement for what their students were achieving through this, I was welling up. I was fighting back tears, because that for me meant that although we're doing this on a very, very small scale, this was having the impact that I set out to achieve. This is the impact. This was more than I could have hoped, more than I could have dreamed of. But those students being excited about learning, I'm not sure whether they really considered it learning. I think they were probably having a lot more fun. but it was a really big deal, a really big deal. And I'm really, really pleased with that feedback. So in conclusion, in terms of acceptability, the teachers reported the students were excited and eager. There was areas for minor reconsideration that have been highlighted in terms of the resources and our delivery, our approach to the curriculum, just minor tweaks. The teachers found the supporting materials easy to use and highlighted areas of strength. So we consider that to be positive. Feasibility, the staff highlighted how hands-off they were able to be. It required minimal planning for them and was not stressful to learn or apply. There was one of the teachers was less confident in this approach, and they would be happy to admit that they were nervous. They were a little bit apprehensive of what this was about, but very quickly found their flow, and they changed the program to suit their students' needs, and I think to suit their comfort level as well. And it transformed the entire experience, which is exactly what we want. And obviously, in terms of feasibility, everything's gone really smoothly for Alan and I, and we've been able to highlight some areas where we can be even more effective in how we manage these projects. And then student engagement, as we've seen, when we crunch the numbers, students with FASD displayed results 0.42 points out of 28 total, lower on the engagement scale than the class as a whole, which is such a tiny number. It's barely significant. 0.42 out of 28. So in terms of that engagement scale and the quantitative data that we gathered, the students with FASD are considered to be as engaged as the class as a whole across the entire program. And something that we want to explore further in phase 2 and future areas of this work, but the results are definitely leaning towards a decreased cognitive load for everybody involved. And that's something that we do want to just explore further, really, so that we can put some true data to that. Alan, I'm going to pass back to you to talk through this one.
Okay, thank you. I think we're nearly done with our just speaking, everyone. So we'll open this up to your suggestions and questions very soon. We've had one good suggestion from Kathy already about things we might start to look at. So as I said, this was phase 1. This is initial. By the way, the word acceptability, you might think that acceptable means sort of just okay but not great. In this context, acceptable is the other meaning of the word acceptable, as in, was it well accepted, was it well received by the people who were using it, i.e. the teachers and the students. The qualitative data that we have was really amazing. I think it went beyond, as Jessica said, even went sort of beyond what we were hoping for. It was incredible feedback from the teachers. But again, bear in mind, this is a very small sample. And so what we have at the moment is we have really encouraging results in terms of, is it well accepted? Is it feasible? When I say feasibility, what I mean is, can we run this project? And is it feasible to actually run the animation curriculum in a classroom? So that's two separate things. There's the whole research study itself and collecting data and working with schools and other people. And then there's actually running the animation curriculum in a classroom. Again, there's no reason to think that either of those is not feasible at this stage. So we're very happy, I think, to say that in terms of acceptability and feasibility, we've passed this stage, and so we're ready to start thinking about phase 2. The rough plan that we have at the moment, and it's quite rough, and we'll continue to talk to people and get input. Where we want to go eventually with this is to conduct something like a randomized control trial. So if you imagine if a drug company develops a new pill, the first thing they'll do is test it in a very small number of people just to make sure it's safe. Then once it's shown to be safe, they'll test it in a larger sample and then eventually do a much bigger randomized control trial. So it's the same kind of approach, except obviously we're not testing something as as simple as a pill here. It's a big sort of educational intervention. But in terms of the research design, it's quite similar. So the phase 2 will be something like a feasibility trial. And I'll just talk about some of the ideas I've got for that. I think number one, we want to have more schools. That's the main thing we're doing in this phase 2, is we want to go way beyond just 2 schools, probably into the tens and dozens. Maybe we've sort of thrown around the numbers 40 or 50 maybe to do in phase 2. We're not looking to do a sample size calculation here, but what we want to do is collect data in phase 2 so that we can do a sample size calculation for a definitive randomized control trial later on. So the exact numbers don't matter too much for phase 2, as long as we can get a good handle on that data, and also continue to see that, is it feasible to deliver the animation curriculum at that bigger scale. We've had some really encouraging conversations with people who might be able to help us deliver the animation curriculum and help us get in touch with schools, especially in Canada. Seems to be a great appetite for the animation curriculum in Canada, and we've spoken to people in other countries. There's a few people in England who I think are keen to work with us, and maybe in other countries as well. I think one of the other things we need to think about is what kind of measures we use. So in this study, we obviously got qualitative feedback from the teachers. I think we would absolutely do that again next time. We used the engagement scale. I think we would probably use that again. But what we want to start doing is go beyond engagement. So you can think about engagement as a sort of mechanism. The first thing that you would look at, the first thing that you would hope is happening in a study like this, is that the children are engaged with it, because if they're not engaged, I think that you don't get anything else after that. So I think we've sort of demonstrated engagement, albeit with a small sample. We'd look at engagement again next time. We want to start looking at other outcomes as well. One of the teachers brought up behavioral difficulties in class. I think we could certainly start to look at things like behavioral difficulties. We could look at things like social functioning between the children in the class and see if there's any improvement there. We could look at sort of mental health and emotional and other social related outcomes in these children. We'd quite like to collect some data from parents and caregivers as well. If, for example, doing the animation curriculum is something that children with FASD do well at, and is something that makes the school day a bit easier, because I think we know, anyone involved in FASD research knows that the school day can be hard work for our young people with FASD. Maybe if they're doing the animation curriculum, it's not so hard work, and we'd like to see if that has any impact on their functioning, their emotional state at home as well as in school. I think we'd also like to look at things like knowledge retention. So I don't think we've talked very much about the topics these schools were teaching. The school in England was teaching the history of England, especially in terms of things like the Romans and the Vikings coming over on boats, the invasions. And the school in Canada they were doing a sort of book. It was an English lesson primarily, but they were learning about biomes. They were reading a book about a chap who has to survive in the wilderness. So they were learning about sort of geography. To what extent does this help with knowledge retention? So we need to think about these outcomes and outcome measures. We need to be quite careful with outcome measures. One thing we've seen in other studies is that the sort of questionnaire-based outcome measures that are available aren't always very good for a neurodiverse population. The language can be a bit wrong, and they can be, often they sort of make you answer on a binary yes or no, but often the answer is sometimes. So we want to talk to people, and again, we'll do a lot more of this sort of PPIE work, talking to families, people affected by FASD, about what kind of outcome measures they're interested in us using. And another thing, and I'll shut up in a minute, but another thing to think about is to what extent we compare the animation curriculum with something else. Obviously, there was no comparison group this time. We just delivered it, and then we collected some data sort of during and afterwards. But in a trial design, you want to compare that with something else so that you can show that your intervention is better than sort of the existing thing that they're doing, or something else. Again, if we use the analogy of a drug trial, that might be a placebo, so a tablet that does nothing, or the current existing treatment. So we could choose to deliver, could choose to compare the animation curriculum with what you might call treatment as usual, which is what the teachers were going to do anyway. Or we could choose to compare it against some other activity, but not one that hasn't been designed in this way, one that doesn't have the logic and the sort of the theory behind it. It's probably it would be seen as being a more fair comparison, because comparing something with nothing introduces a bias into that comparison. So it's more fair to compare something with something, if you see what I mean. Having said that, these are all sort of questions. We don't yet have a sort of solid plan of exactly how we're going to do phase 2. We're going to continue having conversations, and that has started already. And I think we can, in the rest of this session, we've been talking for almost an hour now. I think we can sort of open it up at this point. Is there any more? What else is on the slides now, Jessica? Have I rambled on enough? Yes. Well, again, obviously, huge thank you to the Mohapatra Family Foundation for funding this study. Obviously, very grateful to them, and as Jessica mentioned early on, Pop FASD are a great help, and of course the teachers and the other staff, and of course the students themselves were a great help in this. And I think on the final slide we've got a treat for everyone. If you scan that QR code, I don't suppose we're going to have time to play it in this session, because we've got half an hour left for conversation. But you may want to scan that QR code, and that actually takes you to the videos that the children made in the 2 classrooms during this study. Jessica, I think I'll pass back to you then at that point.
Yeah, I guess. Thank you very much. Let's open up to questions, comments, discussion. Anything at all. We'd really like to hear from you all.